Chapter 6. Effective teaching is much more than an intuitive process. Teachers must continually make decisions and act on those decisions. To do this effectively, teachers must have knowledge, both theoretical knowledge about learning and human behavior, and specific knowledge about the subject matter to be taught. Teachers must also demonstrate a repertoire of teaching skills that are believed to facilitate student learning and must display attitudes that foster learning and genuine human relationships. Once we knew a teacher who was described as having not 20 years of experience, but 1 year's experience 20 times. The message was that this teacher had stopped growing and developing as a professional after the first year. As someone just starting in your teaching career, this kind of problem may seem like a remote possibility. After all, there's so much that you don't know, and you're eager to learn as much as you can. Unfortunately, it is all too easy to fall into comfortable patterns of teaching, especially after you have gained a few years of experience. How can you avoid this compliancy and stagnation? One strategy is to maintain your curiosity and develop habits of inquiry and reflection. More educators are coming to believe that although it is important to prepare beginning teachers for initial practice, it is even more important to help them develop the attitudes and skills that will enable them to become lifelong students of teaching. Ideally, rather than relying on authority, impulse, or unexamined previous practice, teachers will continually examine and evaluate their attitudes, practices, effectiveness, and accomplishments. This process of examination and evaluation is often called reflective teaching, which was introduced in Chapter 1, Why Teach. Reflective teaching is a major theme running throughout this book. Relative teachers ask themselves questions such as these: what am I doing and why? How can I better my students' needs? What are some alternative teaching activities to achieve these subjects? How could I encourage more involvement or learning on the part of the students? Even when lessons go well, reflective teachers analyze the lesson and determine what went well and why, and how else things might have been done. Developing the habits of inquiry and reflection should begin now on your teaching education program. Your experiences with schools, teachers, and students along this path will give you many opportunities to reflect on what has occurred. You can use journal writing, observation instruments, simulations, or video recording to help you examine teaching, learning, and the context in which they occur, comparing your interpretations and give you new insights. As you reflect on your experiences, you will come to distrust simplistic answers and explanations. Nuances and subtleties will start to become clear, in situations that once seemed simple will reveal their complexities. Viewing the video cases associated with this textbook and considering carefully the actions of the teachers can bring you additional insight into what constitutes effective teaching. As you reflect, you are likely to encounter and think about moral and ethical issues. Teachers make moral and ethical decisions every day when they decide how they will treat students and others, when they elect to create a classroom climate that fosters trust, safety, and cooperation. When they select certain examples from history or literature for study, teachers also make ethical decisions. Clearly, you cannot teach without making ethical decisions. Chapter 8, What are the ethical and legal issues facing teachers? It discusses the topic in greater detail, but we hope you will study and reflect on the cases we present throughout this book, as well as the video cases that deal with moral or ethical issues. By practicing reflective teaching, you will grow and develop as an effective professional teacher. In the following case study of a new teacher who faces problems that many classroom veterans will find familiar, we take a critical look at the many teaching decisions that she has had to make. As an example of how ordinary teaching situations can lead to useful reflection about effective teaching, consider the case of Carol Landis. Carol is beginning her first year of teaching. She prepared to be a high school social studies teacher, graduated, and accepted a job in her own community, a small city in the Northwest. Most of her students come from solidly blue-collar, working-class backgrounds. Carol has been assigned 3 periods of world geography and 2 periods of American history. We join her as she prepares the first lesson of a new unit in world geography. Carol plans to require her 9th graders to work in groups to prepare panel discussions about a country of their choice. She wants the group to research the relationships among the geography, political history, and culture of a country and share what they find in a panel discussions with the rest of the class. Carol sets 2 goals for her students: that they work together in groups and that they make effective oral presentations of their research. When planning how to present the assignment to her classes, Carol has many questions. Do these students know how to use the library? If not, will she need to provide directions for reference materials? Maybe the librarian has already taken care of this step and Carol's students will just need a review. Do these students know what culture means and understand general concepts that will help them look for relationships among culture, history, and geography? What background information do they need before they start researching a specific country? Also, do these students know how to work in groups? Have they ever participated in a panel discussion? In planning how to help her students complete this assignment, Carol bases her decisions on what she thinks she knows about them as learners. Although Carol has already planned this assignment to meet her state's curriculum standards in social studies, she is concerned about whether the books in her room in the library will provide the information her students need. Which other resources are available? Carol knows that other teachers have back issues of National Geographic, for example. Maybe she could help students use the internet in ways that tie together the geography, political history, and culture for their respective countries. In addition to the panel discussions, Carol has considered having each student submit a written report. For the first research assignment, however, she decides that an oral presentation by the group is appropriate. Later, she will work with the classes on report writing. In the beginning, she wants her students to enjoy her classes, feel part of a group, and get to know one another. Carol prefers listening to her students over grading written reports anyway, so this assignment fits her style of teaching. Despite her planning, when Carol reflects on her second period class after the first day of library research, she wonders what went wrong. One group argued the whole period and never did select a country. Maybe she should have assigned groups and not let students choose their own partners. She tried to ignore this group, believing they should work out their own differences and come to a group decision. But what if they never worked together? She noticed that another group was completely dominated by one of the top students. He decided which country they would research, assigned the topics, and told the others where to look for information. When Carol urged the other members to share equally in the group discussion, they asserted, "Tom always gets A's. We don't mind if he tells us what to do." Carol didn't know how to respond to this concern for grades without insulting Tom, so she said nothing. Later in the period, Tom asked her which religion predominated in Indonesia. Carol wasn't sure, but was afraid to admit her lack of information, so she told him, "Just look it up." Tom responded, "So you don't know either?" Carol testily told Tom that she was not his personal encyclopedia. Now she wonders if she overreacted. Maybe she should have admitted she didn't know. Was Tom challenging her authority, or was he just reacting to the sharp tone in her order to look it up? Did she turn Tom and his group against her? Carol always wonders whether other groups worked productively. She spent so much time watching the arguing group and Tom's group that she didn't have time to notice whether the chatter from the other groups was work or play. Maybe it didn't hurt to let the other groups have some fun today anyway. She can direct her attention to them tomorrow. There is so much to watch and monitor when students work in groups, Carol realizes. Many questions arise, such as, where do I find this? Mr. Shaw won't lend me his magazines. What do I do now? This library stinks. Why do we have to do this assignment anyway? And even, Miss Landis, what did you do this weekend? Carol wonders if she will ever learn to field all of her students' questions and comments and to distinguish the words on the surface from the real messages. She also worries about what to do about Ron, who has started reading a novel about life in Siberian concentration camps. Carol thinks it is the only book she has ever seen him read, but won't help his group do their project on Kenya. Maybe this assignment wasn't such a good idea in the first place, Carol thinks, or maybe she just wasn't up to working with her classes in groups. The stares from the librarian and the study hall teacher indicated that they didn't think she could handle panel discussions. Just thinking about it all exhausts her. How will she ever get through another day with that second period class? We present Carol's case to illustrate that a teacher's role can be described as one of a reflective decision maker. Indeed, some educational researchers have identified skills in decision making as the most important teaching skill. Some decisions are made as teachers quietly deliberate curricular and instructional goals. Many more must be made almost instantaneously as teachers and students interact. Let's look at some of the particular decisions that Carol made or will make, dividing them into 3 basic stages: planning, implementing, and evaluating. Carol wants her students to understand the relationships among geography, history, and culture. But what exactly does she want them to know about these relationships? She must decide the particular kinds of understanding she wants her students to achieve, and this decision affects her choice of teaching techniques. From a variety of possible techniques, she has chosen independent group work and has also decided that a panel discussion will provide evidence for her students' learning. These decisions reflect Carol's personal preferences, her goals for her students' learning, and her skills and methods of evaluating their learning. In addition, her decisions are based on a series of judgments about her students' ability to do research, work in groups, and present panel discussions, as well as on judgments about how long they will need to work together and which resources they will need. Carol might have also made some plans for what to do in case her judgments turned out to be wrong and she needed to adapt her lesson. Carol, like most teachers, must make many of her decisions almost instantly, as she adapts her teaching to changing classroom conditions. As Carol teaches this lesson, or series of lessons, she has to decide when and how to intervene with some of her groups, whether to allow Ron to continue reading a novel and how to respond to students' questions. After the first day's library work, Carol reflects on her interactions with the students, facing decisions about how she has to adjust her strategies for the next day. As the groups continue to work, she will also face decisions about how to evaluate the impact of her planning and instruction on her students' learning. In each of these planning, implementing, and evaluating stages of instructional decision-making, Carol chooses among alternative concepts her students could learn, approach to help them learn the concepts, ways to manage the classroom to encourage their learning, and ways to measure their learning. Could her decisions improve with more adequate knowledge, skills, and attitudes? Teachers do not make instructional decisions in a vacuum. Many factors influence the process. First and foremost are the students. Knowing and understanding your students and their background is imperative in your decisions to be effective. Students differ in many ways, all of which affect how they learn. Some students come from poverty backgrounds, which can influence their readiness to learn. Many students from poverty backgrounds are more likely to suffer from the effects of poor nutrition and inadequate health care, which can affect their abilities to attend school regularly, concentrate on learning, and do homework. School also tends to be oriented more towards serving middle-class children, making the curriculum and instructional experiences germane to poor children constitute a major challenge that our schools and teachers must meet. As our schools become more diverse, currently 44% of school-age children are minorities. Many students' native language will not be English, presenting a serious challenge to schools and teachers. Students' gender influences how we think of them and what we expect of them. Treating boys and girls equitably as individuals rather than as stereotypes is a challenge for both male and female teachers. You will undoubtedly have children with special needs in your classroom. Differentiating instruction to meet both their needs and the needs of your other students will be a challenge. Students differ in terms of their needs for belonging, safety, and self-esteem. Children coming from secure home situations will likely have different needs than children who have not had this kind of stability. Your students will all have different abilities, achievements, and learning styles, and your challenge will be to provide a variety of learning experiences to accommodate the diversity that your students will bring to your classroom. Next, we explore the areas of competence that help teachers make more effective decisions. Many educators believe that to be effective decision makers, elementary and secondary school teachers must have attitudes, knowledge, and skills essential to the teaching profession. Teachers should ask themselves not only, what am I going to teach, but also, what should my students be learning? How can I help them learn it, and why is it important? To answer these questions, teachers must be familiar with children and their developmental stages. They must know something about events occurring outside the classroom and the expectations that the society has for its young. In addition, teachers must have enough command of the subject they teach to be able to distinguish what is peripheral from what is central. They must have a philosophy of education that guides them in their role as a teacher, and they must know how human beings learn and how to create environments that promote learning. What are the specialized skill and attributes of the effective instructional decision maker? We consider 5 areas of competence to be essential for teachers. 1. Attitudes that foster learning and genuine human relationships. 2. Knowledge of the subject matter to be taught. 3. theoretical knowledge about learning and human behavior. 4. Personal practical knowledge. 5. Skills of teaching that promote student learning. Teachers draw on their competence in these 5 areas to inform the many decisions they make, both as they plan instruction and as they spontaneously interact with the students in their classes. Figure 6.1 indicates the relationship of these areas of competence to the process of instructional decision making. Next, we examine these areas of competence, now and then referring to the instructional decisions that Carol made and the attitudes, knowledge, and skills influencing her decisions. Many people believe that a teacher's personality is the most critical factor in successful teaching. If teachers have warmth, empathy, sensitivity, enthusiasm, and humor, they are much more likely to be successful than if they lack these characteristics. In fact, many people argue that without these attributes, an individual is unlikely to be a good teacher. The Leaders in Education feature portrays one teacher known for her positive attitude, Helen Keller's famous tutor, Anne Mansfield Sullivan. For years, educational researchers sought to isolate the characteristics essential to good teachers. General information about a teacher's personality, attitude, experience, achievement, and aptitude were all examined in an effort to predict a teacher's classroom behavior. Unfortunately, these characteristics were often unrelated to the teacher's work in the classroom, and they ignored the most important measures of effective teaching: the interactions of the teacher with the learners, and the academic performance of the students being taught. The proof is in the pupil, in this case Helen Keller. A blind and deaf pupil was a terror. Wily and mean, Helen was also animal-like. Nevertheless, her teacher, Anne Sullivan, enabled her to become an international celebrity. Sullivan pioneered the teaching of individuals without sight and without hearing. Today we speak of a deaf culture, but this term was not used in the era of Anne Sullivan. Teacher, as Helen always called her, is credited with making it possible to reach students who were thought to have mental retardation. The daughter of Irish immigrants, Sullivan was born in Feeding Hills, Massachusetts on April 14, 1866, and entered the almshouse at 8 when her mother died and her father abandoned her and her brother. Half blind herself, she went to the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston at age 14 without a toothbrush, hat, or coat. Her only possessions were a shirt and stockings tied in a bundle. At age 21, Sullivan took a job offered by the Keller family in Tuscumbia, Alabama, to teach the Keller's daughter, Helen. Helen Keller was an angry and frustrated child, but she was not stupid. Sullivan quickly realized this fact and began her assault on Helen's locked mind. Within a month, she had made contact with Helen in the now famous pump story immortalized in the drama The Miracle Worker. Sullivan's fingers spelled words into Helen's hand, each word suiting an action. Finally, Helen, feeling water over her head, realized the connection between word and object. She had broken the code and realized that everything had a name. Sullivan's methods were practical. She taught Helen to play through games and exercises, stimulating her to ask the names of the motions. She kept a menagerie of animals for Helen to help her understand movement. She progressed to abstractions like peace and God as soon as her pupil was ready. Sullivan wanted to make Helen as normal as possible, giving her every experience she could. She worked at teaching her to sit, stand, and walk properly. As soon as Helen could distinguish between right and wrong, the teacher sent her to bed for misdeeds. Laziness, carelessness, untidiness, and procrastination were dealt with by ingenuity, humor, and light sarcasm. Helen used the manual alphabet for 3 years before she began to speak. When Helen was 9, Sullivan was rewarded with the words, "I am not dumb now." It was one of the most dramatic achievements in the history of teaching. Sullivan's great discovery was that a child should not be taught each word separately by a separate definition, but instead should be given endless repetition of language he or she does not understand all day long. Sullivan continually spelled words into Helen's hand to mimic the way a hearing child in the cradle absorbs words. This method had never before been put into practice in the education of a deaf child, especially a deaf-blind one. When Helen attended a school for deaf pupils in New York, Anne Sullivan went along. At Cambridge School and Radcliffe College, Sullivan attended classes, interpreting instruction, and looking up words for Helen. She made herself into Helen's eyes and ears and supplied knowledge to a starving mind as she fired her pupils' drive to study hard. After college, Sullivan accompanied Helen on worldwide lecture tours as Helen became a famous author and personality. Extraordinarily close, teacher and pupil spent much of their lives together. The name teacher has been enriched by Anne Sullivan's dedicated life, persistent high standards, and creative instruction. Two researchers summarizing 50 years of research on teachers' personalities and characteristics conclude, despite the critical importance of the problem and half a century of prodigious research effort, very little is known for certain about the nature and measurement of teacher personality, about the relation between a teacher personality and teacher effectiveness. A person's attitudes, that is, his or her predispositions to act in a positive or negative way towards people, ideas, and events, are a fundamental dimension of that individual's personality. Although the relationship between general personality traits and teacher effectiveness has proven elusive, almost all educators are convinced of the importance of teacher attitudes in the teaching process. Attitudes have a direct but often unrecognized effect on our behavior in that they determine the ways we view ourselves and interact with others. We believe 4 major categories of attitudes affect teaching behavior: the teacher's attitude toward self, the teacher's attitude toward children and the relationships between self and children, the teacher's attitude toward peers and pupils' parents, and the teacher's attitude towards the subject matter. There is evidence from psychology that people who deny or cannot cope with their own emotions are likely to be incapable of respecting and coping with the feelings of others. If teachers are to understand and sympathize with their students' feelings, they must recognize and understand their own feelings. Many colleges are responding to this need by including counseling sessions, reflective thinking, and awareness experiences as part of their teacher education programs. These experiences emphasize introspection, self-evaluation, and feedback from other participants. The goal is to help prospective teachers learn more about themselves, their attitudes, and how other people perceive them. In general, a teacher's expectation that all students can succeed seems to make a difference in students' achievement. As a teacher, you need to believe that all of your students are capable of high academic achievement and adjust your beliefs and behavior on the needs, abilities, and aspirations of each individual student. Most teachers occasionally harbor attitudes or feelings towards some of their students that are detrimental to being an effective teacher. Strong likes and dislikes of particular pupils, biases toward or against particular ethnic groups, low learning expectations for children from poverty backgrounds, and biases in favor of or against certain kinds of students' behavior all can reduce teaching effectiveness. Self-awareness of such attitudes towards individual pupils or classes of children is necessary if teachers are to cope with their own feelings and beliefs. If teachers possess empathy for their students and value them as unique individuals, these teachers will be more effective and will derive more satisfaction from their teaching. If a teacher expects a student or group of students to behave in a certain way, the teacher's attitude may serve as a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, these students may conform to the teacher's low expectations, thus confirming the teacher's original expectations. On the other hand, when teachers hold high expectations for students and communicate these high expectations, students will often act in ways to live up to the teacher's expectations. A teacher's attitude toward an expectation of students are powerful influences on whether or not students learn. Teachers do not exist in isolated classrooms. They interact with fellow teachers and administrators and often have sensitive dealings with parents. Sometimes teachers can be effective in dealing with children, but not work well with fellow educators and their students' parents. For example, some teachers may resent people in authority and resist their suggestions for improvement. Other teachers may yield too easily to suggestions from people in authority, only to later feel guilty about complying instead of sticking up for their own convictions. Or some teachers may feel the need to compete with other teachers for administrative or student approval. Many of the comments already made regarding teachers' attitudes toward themselves and children also apply to their attitudes towards peers and parents. Some teachers may harbor feelings of superiority or prejudice towards students' parents. Others simply have little tolerance for people who differ from them in values, cultural background, or economic status, and as a result, they treat parents with a disdain and contempt rather than patience and respect. By contrast, effective teachers, those who work well with colleagues and parents to empower children to achieve, show attitudes of acceptance. In their dealings with other teachers and parents, teachers should be real and genuine, value other people as worthy in their own right, and show empathy. The message in one word is enthusiasm. Just as students are perceptive in discovering a teacher's attitude towards them, they are also sensitive to a teacher's attitude towards the subject matter. Teachers who are not enthusiastic about what they teach can hardly hope to instill enthusiasm in their pupils. After all, if you don't care about the subject matter, how can you ever hope to motivate your students into learning about it? Some teachers find it difficult to feel enthusiasm for a curriculum they haven't constructed themselves, don't identify with, or don't want to teach. Unfortunately, as states have adopted learning standards geared towards mandatory testing for students, the latitude that teachers once had to choose content is being greatly curtailed. States expect teachers to teach to the standards, and the high-stakes assessment tests given to students exert considerable pressure on teachers to be certain that they cover the content contained on the assessments. If you have to teach something you would rather not, try to develop a positive attitude towards the subject. Enthusiasm is key to teaching success. If a teacher has it, life in the classroom can be exciting. If it is missing, there is little hope that students will learn much of the significance. You are a woman a beginning teacher in a 9th grade English course. As the first semester proceeds, you realize that one of your students, Fred, has a crush on you. He's always volunteering to help you pass out papers, and he lingers after class each day to talk to you. He finds out your home address and comes to visit you one Saturday morning. His actions are becoming obvious to the other students who are starting to kid him about his infatuation. What do? You are generally recognized as one of the most popular teachers in your high school. The students look on you as a friend and who can be trusted, and you have told them that if they ever have problems, whether school-related or personal, they should feel free to come to you. One day, Marianne, a junior in one of your classes, seeks you out. Close to hysteria, she tells you she is 10 weeks pregnant. You are the first person she has told. She begs you for advice, but insists that you do not tell her parents. What would you do? You are a 4th grade teacher. Until recently, you have been quite comfortable in your class of 22 children. About 3 weeks ago, you had to speak to Debbie. Although she is your brightest student, she was continually talking when you were trying to address the class. Since your conversation, Debbie has been as cool as ice to you, and you recently discovered an ashy drawing on your desk drawer that was supposed to be you. What would you do? You are a white teacher in a somewhat racially tinged school. There are 7 African American students in one of your classes. Because you worry about alienating the African American students and being accused of prejudice, you make special efforts to treat them fairly. One day, 3 of your white students come to see you and accuse you of coddling the African American students and discriminating against whites. What would you do? You teach in a school that uses a letter grading system. You have assigned your students a term paper. You know that one student has spent hours and hours on his report, but its quality is quite poor. The student has already expressed his hope that you will take effort into account when grading their reports. What would you do? Researchers have not definitely established why some teachers treat students they perceive as high achievers and low achievers differently, but observations of many classroom teachers reveal that they often behave differently toward these 2 groups of students. Good and Brophy have summarized these differences. Teachers wait less time for lows to answer a question. Teachers give lows answers or call on someone else for the answer instead of giving clues or providing additional opportunities to respond. Teachers reward lows for inappropriate behaviors or incorrect answers. Lows are more often criticized for failure than our highs. Lows are praised less frequently for success than our highs. Generally, teachers interact less often with lows, paying less attention to them. Teachers call on lows less often for answers to questions. Teachers seek lows farther from the teacher. Less is demanded from lows. When teachers grade tests and assignments, they give highs but not lows the benefit of the doubt in borderline cases. Lows experience fewer friendly interactions, including fewer smiles and other nonverbal signs of support. Teachers make less eye contact and respond less attentively to lows. Teachers demonstrate less acceptance and use of lows ideas. Lows are exposed to an impoverished curriculum. As a teacher, you should make it a point to reflect on your own behavior towards low and high achievers, making sure that you are treating all your students fairly. Very simply, prospective teachers need to understand the content of the subjects they teach, as well as the methods of teaching the specific content. 3 important components contribute to a teacher's content knowledge. First, teachers need to understand the subjects they teach well enough to analyze and convey their elements, logic, possible uses, and social biases. That is, teachers need to understand the structure of the subject they teach. Second, teachers must understand the content of the school curriculum that pupils are expected to know. Unfortunately, most college courses in the specific disciplines do not prepare prospective teachers to actually teach the knowledge that students are expected to learn. Much of what prospective teachers learn from their study of the academic disciplines is not taught to children, and so is not directly applicable to teaching. This is particularly true for elementary school teachers who are called on to teach content that is rarely taught in universities. For example, a mathematics major who is preparing to teach elementary school may never have occasion to use differential equations or calculus in the content he or she teaches to elementary age children. Thus, although studying and understanding specific disciplines is crucial, it is not sufficient for effective teaching. Teachers must also study the actual curriculum taught in their school, as well as either the Common Core or state learning standards for the particular grade. Carol Landis, for example, designed her group project so that it would contribute to her students' ability to meet their district standards in social studies. A third type of knowledge shown by effective teachers is a pedagogical content knowledge. The knowledge that bridges content knowledge and pedagogy. Pedagogical knowledge represents the blending of content and pedagogy represented in the adapted to the diverse interests and abilities of learners and presented for instruction. Skilled teachers draw on the most powerful analogies, illustrations, examples, explanations, and demonstrations to represent and transform the subject so that students can understand it. For example, a physics teacher who possesses pedagogical content knowledge might use the analogy of water flowing through a pipe to explain how water flowing through a pipe to explain how electricity flows through a circuit. But he or she would also know the limitations of such an analogy. Pedagogical content knowledge enables teachers to recognize common misunderstandings that students may make in learning new concepts and to know how to overcome those errors in thinking. 3 types of knowledge: discipline content, curriculum content, and pedagogical content are, we believe, essential for effective teachers. Did Carol Landis have such knowledge? We suspect not, at least not to that degree that she could communicate information and concepts to her class with the authority and expertise required for effective teaching. In the next section, we examine more closely the area of effective teachers' knowledge, theoretical knowledge about learning and human behavior. Theoretical knowledge about learning and human behavior equips teachers to draw on concepts from psychology, anthropology, sociology, and related disciplines to interpret the complex reality of the classroom. Teachers who lack a theoretical background will have to interpret classroom events according to commonly held beliefs or common sense, much of which is based on erroneous notions of human behavior. Carol Landis operated on the basis of certain ideas that are called theories in use, which differ from theories in important ways. A theory is an unproved explanation of why something happens the way it does. In its simplest form, a theory has a hypothesis designed to bring generalized facts, concepts, or scientific laws into systematic connection. By contrast, a theory in use is something people have in their heads and apply in their dealings with people in the world. Theories in use are often unexamined. We all have our own theories in use which guide us as we make our way through our daily lives. For example, you may eat certain foods because you have an idea that they have a healthy effect on the body. You may also decide to take a summer job in a public playground, believing that you will get to know children better and that future prospective employers might be pleased or impressed when they discover your experience. Carol Landis has several theories in use. For example, she has the theory in use that groups should operate democratically and not be dominated by one student. She also has a theory in use that some children will perform better in school than others. As a result, Carol expects certain behavior from certain kinds of students. She also has a classroom management theory in use that she should give students some leeway before she resorts to firm discipline when they exceed her level of tolerance. Some of Carol's theories in use are clearly questionable. A few may have contributed to her problems that day in the library, and some may cause her more problems further down the line. Carol was not worried about her theories in use. However, she was worried about what she did and what she will do. In other words, Carol didn't question some of her conceptions. Theories in use were the last thing she had in mind, even though they actually caused some of her problems. The fact that Carol did not reflect on the validity of her theories in use or try to recall some theories she had learned during her teacher education is not unusual. Indeed, many teachers question the basic usefulness of theory. Many beginning teachers have been told by a senior colleague, forget all that theory they've been giving you in college. Here's what works in the real world. Further, pre-service teachers often complain that courses are too theoretical. They want to get out to schools where the real action is. They desire for things that work and ways to cope with real situations is vital, and we certainly do not want to diminish it. As a teacher, you will need practical techniques and solutions to real problems. Even so, it does not make educational theory any less important. The case of Carol Landis illustrates how a lack of theoretical knowledge of classroom management can lead to inappropriate behavior on the teacher's part. Both theory and empirical research shows the notion of being consistent in your expectation of student behavior. Carol, however, thought it was acceptable to let students behave as they wish until they crossed her tolerance threshold, at which point she came down hard on them. Carol probably would not have encountered such trouble if more of her theories in use had been challenged and adjusted. Like Carol, you may have your own theories in use, and they need to be challenged and tested. The best way to do so is to pit them against other theories and ideas. We believe that theoretical information is practical. The problem is not that theory is always wrong or unworkable, but rather that many teacher education programs offer students few opportunities to apply theory to practical situations. As the great American philosopher John Dewey said, nothing is so practical as a good theory. By giving attention to theoretical knowledge, now we are also looking ahead to the future. At a later stage of your development, you will encounter theories that will undoubtedly enlighten and enrich your work with the young. A teacher's theoretical knowledge can be used in two ways: to interpret new or ambiguous situations and to solve problems. As the up-close feature, Teaching Art or Science, describes the art of teaching as knowing how and when to apply research and theory in the fast-paced classroom. Let's consider an example of how theoretical knowledge can help teachers interpret classroom events and solve the problems arising from them. Educational psychology includes the concept known as the zone of proximal development, meaning a range of tasks that a child cannot yet do alone, but can accomplish when assisted by a more skilled partner. In other words, the child is on the verge of being able to solve a problem, but just needs some structures, clues, help with remembering certain steps or procedures, or encouragement to try. This zone is where instruction can succeed and where real learning is possible. The concept of the zone of proximal development derives from the work of Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who theorized that a child's culture shapes cognitive development by determining what and how the child will learn about the world. Now suppose that a student, John, is experiencing difficulty doing some percentage problems in math. You as a teacher understand that the zone of proximal development is influenced by reasoning ability, background knowledge, and motivation. Armed with this theoretical background, you assess John's ability to understand the problems by watching him try to solve one of them. You ask him to explain to you what he is thinking as he attempts the solutions. Is he missing some important understanding, or is he making some procedural error? Are the problems too difficult, or should he be able to solve them with some assistance? If the latter, what kind of assistance does he need? Who should give him the assistance, you or another student? You decide that John is not lacking any fundamental knowledge and is very close to understanding the correct procedures. You ask Mary, a student who understands percentage problems pretty well, to come over and think aloud as she works on one of the problems. By thinking aloud and having John follow along, Mary provides John with insight into how she goes about solving the problem. You encourage John to ask Mary questions as she goes over her solution. You now ask John to work a similar problem, also thinking aloud as he tries to solve it. This time he gets the problem correct. You ask him to do a couple more problems and to raise his hand when he finishes so you can check whether his understanding carried over to the new problems. How did the theoretical knowledge about the zone of proximal development help you in assisting John? First, you had to determine whether John was close to understanding or missing some fundamental knowledge. Was he in the zone of proximal development where additional coaching or assistance would help him, or would you have to reteach some important knowledge that he didn't have? Second, you had to decide which sort of scaffolding would benefit John. By having both Mary and John think aloud as they solved the problem, mistakes or errors could be easily determined, and if solved correctly, would provide a model for John. An understanding of the zone of proximal development and its related scaffolding strategies presents the kind of theoretical knowledge that can help you interpret and solve classroom problems. One of the pioneers of research on teaching, the late N.L. Gage of Stanford University and Robert Marzano, a contemporary educational researcher, both believe teaching cannot be reduced to formulas or recipes for action, but see it as a blend of art and science. Teaching can be considered an art because teachers must improvise and spontaneously handle a tremendous number of factors that interact in often unpredictable and non-systematic ways in classroom settings. At the same time, both contend that teaching is also a science, although science cannot offer absolute guidance for teachers as they plan and implement instructional strategies. Research can provide a scientific basis for the art of teaching. For example, the research on academic engaged time has demonstrated the importance of keeping pupils on task with intellectually challenging but not too difficult subject matter. These two components of teaching, art and science, interact in exciting ways. Empirically derived knowledge of the relationship among teacher behavior, pupil behavior, material to be learned, and desired student learning can guide teachers as they make artistic decisions about their teaching. That is, teachers use their knowledge of the research on these relationships to accomplish the artistry of moving a unique classroom filled with unique students toward the intended learning. Is teaching an art or a science? The answer is yes. This example helps show that teachers need much more than a common sense understanding of human behavior. Capable and effective teachers use theoretical knowledge drawn from various education-related disciplines to formulate and test hypotheses about human behavior in the classroom. The translation of theory into practice cannot be left to chance. However, you must constantly take advantage of opportunities that allow you to apply theoretical concepts to classroom situations and to receive guidance and feedback from your instructors about the application of these concepts. The field of cognitive psychology, in particular, has provided a treasure trove of research findings and theoretical concepts for teachers. Personal practical knowledge is the set of understanding teachers have of the practical circumstances in which they work. Personal practical knowledge includes the beliefs, insight, and habits that allow teachers to do their jobs in school. This type of knowledge tends to be time-bound and situation-specific. Personally compelling and oriented towards action, teachers use their personal practical knowledge to solve dilemmas, resolve tensions, and simplify the complexities of their work. For example, the personal practical knowledge that Carol Landis must develop ranges from learning whether another teacher will loan his collection of National Geographic magazines to other classes, to clarifying her beliefs about whether assigning students to groups is better than letting them choose their own groups. Because teachers' personal practical knowledge is so intertwined with their identities as individuals, researchers have not been able to summarize this knowledge into a codified body of teaching knowledge. Case studies of teachers' knowledge have, however, provided us with rich images of how teachers use their knowledge to make sense of the complex, ill-structured environment that characterizes most classrooms. Teachers' personal practical knowledge definitely influences the decisions they make. Some researchers argue that a well-informed belief system is the most credible basis for rational teacher decisions. They assert that teachers should become aware of the assumptions that comprise their belief system. Over time, as they develop attitudes and habits of practice, teachers should reflect on these beliefs to ensure that they conform to accepted educational principles. Carol Landis, for example, is already reflecting on the educational soundness of her belief that students work well in groups with their friends. As you plan instruction, interact in classrooms, and evaluate instructional outcomes, continually testing your attitudes and habits of practice against sound educational principles can help protect you against poor educational decision-making. Simply knowing something does not guarantee the ability to act on the knowledge. There is a profound difference between knowing and doing. Teachers may know, for example, that they should provide prompt feedback to their students on written assignments, but they are not always able to act on that knowledge. Teachers may also know that certain kinds of questions stimulate higher cognitive levels of thinking, but they may not be able to ask those types of questions during a discussion. No teacher education program can afford to focus only on theoretical knowledge at the expense of the practice, that is, the doing dimension of teaching, just as no individual teacher can rely solely on knowledge of subject matter. All prospective teachers need to develop a repertoire of teaching skills to use as they see fit in varying classroom situations. Among the skills that many educators believe are essential to effective teaching are the following: asking different kinds of questions, each requiring different types of thought processes from students, providing effective feedback, planning instruction and student learning activities, diagnosing students' need and learning difficulties, varying the learning situation to keep students involved, recognizing when students are paying attention and using this information to vary behavior and possibly the direction of the lesson, using technological equipment such as computers to enhance student learning, assessing student learning, differentiating instruction based on students' experiences, interests, and academic abilities, using students' cultures to make learning experiences relevant and effective for them. Although far from complete, this list does suggest that teachers need a large repertoire of skills to work effectively with students who have varying backgrounds and different educational experiences. Using a variety of approaches, it is essential to meet the many different needs of students. As figure 6.1 illustrates, effective use of teaching skills, along with appropriate attitude, knowledge of subject matter, theoretical knowledge, and personal practical knowledge leads to better instructional decision making. Next, we focus on the skills prospective teachers need in 3 areas that are often of special concern: classroom management, effective questioning and planning techniques. No other dimension of teaching causes more concern for beginning teachers than managing the classroom and maintaining discipline. Will I be able to manage and control my classes so I can teach effectively is a question most beginning teachers ask themselves. Because this aspect of teaching generates so much anxiety, we have chosen to spend some time on this skill area first, before turning somewhat more briefly to questioning and planning skills. Classroom management refers to the actions teachers take to create an environment that is respectful, caring, orderly, and productive. Classroom management supports and facilitates both academic and socio-emotional learning, developing teacher-student rapport, arranging the physical environment, establishing rules and procedures, and maintaining students' attention to lessons and engagement in activities are examples of classroom managerial behavior. Managerial behavior also includes housekeeping duties such as record keeping and managing time, facilities, and resources in the classroom. Effective classroom management focuses on how to prevent misbehavior as well as how to handle misbehavior when it occurs. A number of factors contribute to beginning teachers' concerns about classroom management. First, classrooms are complex, diverse, and crowded environments that challenge teachers to meet the different needs of each individual student. Second, classes are more culturally diverse than ever, and the norms of what constitutes acceptable and desirable behavior often vary among different cultures. Third, many children with disabilities are now educated in general education classrooms, presenting regular education teachers with considerable challenge to meet the needs of all students. Fourth, many students come from circumstances that create psychological and emotional problems with which teachers must cope. And finally, beginning teachers often report that their teacher education programs did not adequately prepare them to address the factors mentioned previously. The last 40 years or so have proved significant new knowledge about effective classroom management practices. The following sections describe some of those findings. Research that focuses on student behavior, such as academic engagement time, reveals some interesting insights into effective teaching skills. Academic engaged time, also known as engaged learning time, is the time students spend successfully engaged with academically relevant activities or materials. Several research studies indicate that academic engaged time is strongly related to achievement in those subjects. Simply put, the more time elementary students spend working on reading or mathematics activities that provide them with successful experiences, the more likely they are to achieve in those areas. Although this finding may not seem very startling, observations indicate that tremendous differences exist in the amount of time individual students spend engaged in academic activities, both across classrooms and within the same classroom. The research on academic engaged time clearly indicates that a primary goal of elementary teachers should be to keep students on task. Classes that are poorly managed usually have little academic learning time, so a major task of teachers is to learn how to manage their classes so that students are productively engaged. Numerous studies indicate that the most effective teachers are able to engage their students about 30 minutes a day, longer than average teachers. If the most efficient teachers are compared with the least efficient, daily differences of 1 hour in academic engaged time appear. When this difference is extrapolated over 180 days, students of efficient teachers get 90 hours more of academic engaged time than students of average teachers, and 180 hours more than students of inefficient teachers. Differences of this magnitude may help explain why students in some classes learn more than students in others. How teachers set up physical environment of the classroom directly affects the way teachers and students interact with one another. Deciding how the chairs, desks, computers, printers, tables, and books are arranged sends a message and affects the atmosphere of the classroom. By adding warm colors, plants, attractive and informative bulletin boards, teachers make classrooms a warmer and inviting atmosphere. Winston and Weber offer some specific suggestions for designing classroom space. Place frequently used materials so that they are accessible to students. Organize shelves and storage areas so that students know where materials and equipment belong. Reduce congestion and distraction by planning pathways through the room. Arrange seating so students have a clear view of instructional presentations. Decide how much interaction you want among students and arrange desks, tables to reflect that interaction. For example, if you want interaction and collaboration among students, don't put them in rows. Personalize the classroom by including displays that reflect students' cultural backgrounds, interests, and accomplishments, as well as your own interests, goals, and values. Be certain the environment will accommodate students with special needs, such as wheelchairs. Locate computers so monitors are perpendicular to windows and away from magnets and water, out of traffic paths, and in a space that will accommodate a small group of students. A number of educational researchers have tried to identify expert and experienced teachers and compare them with novice teachers, but before you read what researchers have found out about expert teachers, stop and reflect on a teacher of your experience whom you consider to be truly an expert teacher. Not necessarily your favorite teacher, but the most skillful. What made this teacher so expert? You can think of expert teachers as being similar to expert chess players, except chess players quickly spot trouble areas in any chessboard pattern. Likewise, expert teachers quickly recognize trouble spots in a classroom setting. Experts in chess or teaching draw on their hours of experience to build a repertoire of recognizable patterns. In one experiment, expert and novice teachers were asked to look at a photograph of a classroom and identify the class activity. Experts were able to read the classroom, making references about what was happening in the picture. When observed in action, expert teachers also show greater ability to gather information in a short time for multiple purposes. For example, an expert teacher may be able to accomplish many tasks in an opening review session, gather attendance information, identify who did or did not do the homework, and locate students needing help with the next lesson. In comparison, novice teachers described the surface characteristics of the classroom picture they saw. When presented with descriptions of student problems, they relied again on the literal features of the problems to suggest solutions. Their analysis did not correspond with the higher order classifications expert teachers use. Experts differed from novices in their approaches to planning as well. In a simulated task of planning, experts focused on learning what students already knew about the subject matter to be learned, whereas novices planned to ask students where they were in their textbooks and then present a review of important concepts. In other words, experts planned to gather information from the students, whereas novices planned to give information to them. The research suggests that experts in any field demonstrate skill in planning and in classifying problems and formulating solutions. This is no less true for teachers. Expert teachers show problem-solving skills like those of other experts, whether in chess, bridge, or physics. The studies also indicate that the process of evolving from novice to expert teachers takes considerable time because extensive experience is necessary to develop into episodic knowledge to interpret information about classrooms. A review of more than 100 studies concluded that positive teacher-student relationships are the key to effective classroom management, and such relationships can reduce behavior problems by over 30%. Students who feel cared for and supportive are more willing to accept a teacher's authority and to regulate their own behavior consistent with the classroom norms. There is also evidence that caring, respectful teachers are particularly important to African American and Hispanic students who often feel that many white teachers stereotype them and fail to honor their cultural backgrounds or understand their perspectives. All teachers want to have good relationships with their students, but how can they demonstrate this to students? Weinstein and Weber offer the following suggestions. Be welcoming, standing by the door when students enter the classroom, and greeting them sends a good message. Inquiring as how they are doing or commenting on a new look helps to build a connection. A brief inquiry at the beginning of class shows students are really concerned about their feelings. Learn about your students' lives. Try having your students complete a questionnaire about their favorite hobbies, music, pets, or after-school work. Attending their sporting events, concerts, or plays let you see your students in a different context. Develop cultural literacy. Understanding your students' cultural background, values, and beliefs is essential for building good teacher-student relationships. Communicate high expectations in interviews with inner-city students. Many of them talk about the importance of having teachers who push them to do their schoolwork and who won't let them fail. Be a good listener. Be attentive and acknowledge students' feelings and use active listening techniques. To build a sense of community in your classroom, Weinstein and Weber offer the following suggestions. Provide opportunities for students to learn about each other. Use small group work and cooperative learning activities. Hold group meetings to encourage open communication and group problem solving. Be alert for bullying and peer harassment. Many other researchers have studied effective classroom management. Two key principles emerge from this research. Good management is preventative rather than reactive. And teachers create well-managed classrooms by teaching their students desired behavior. Here are a few other important recommendations arriving from the research. Establish clearly defined rules and routines. Clear rules and routines decrease the complexity of the classroom, minimize confusion, and prevent loss of instructional time. Having students help make the rules increases their commitment to abide by them. Ensure students' compliance with rules and demands. To encourage students to comply willingly with the rules and routines, teachers must gain students' cooperation by establishing positive relationships, sharing responsibilities, and using rewards. This is accomplished more effectively by establishing and maintaining effective learning environments than by relying on authority or a teacher's role as a disciplinarian. Nevertheless, teachers must be willing to enforce the consequences for repeated misconduct and be able to administer those outcomes in a way that is not threatening, punitive, or perceived as unfair. Involve families. When families understand what a teacher is trying to achieve, they can carry out successful behavior management plans. One school of thought rejects the notion of effective classroom management as a system of rewards and punishments, arguing that these outcomes are seen as instruments for controlling people. In this approach, instead of teachers seeing themselves as being in charge and taking steps to maintain that control, they should give up some of the control and help students work together to decide how to be respectful and fair. That is, teachers should help students develop an internal sense of how to work together in a community. The approach may sometimes engender chaos and uncertainty, but advocates believe that students will learn ethics and democracy in action. One of your responsibilities as a teacher will be to develop a philosophy and ways of operating in the classroom that make sense to you and that accomplish what you value. Your attitude towards the use of rewards and punishments will be part of that development. As a result, researchers' work, we are learning more about what constitutes effective classroom management behavior, understanding the related theories and research, and practicing the skills of this body of knowledge has identified as effective will help you establish and maintain the conditions that promote student learning. Effective classroom management is a skill that can be taught and learned. When students misbehave, check your instruction. Many behavior problems result from problems with instruction. Students may be bored or confused, in which case their response may be to get off task and get into trouble. Take the time to ensure that students fully understand your classroom rules and procedures. As the old adage has it, you have to keep school before you can teach school. At the beginning of the year, and again, if and when things begin to break down, teachers need to fix in the minds of their students how the class is to be ordered. Regularly monitor the entire class. Successful classroom managers frequently scan the class, noticing what each student is doing. Although teachers need not react to every sign of off-task behavior or deviation from the established procedure, students should know that what they are doing is being noted. Move in on repeated or flagrant breaches of conduct quickly and directly. Do not let things drift. Students may think you are afraid to confront them, and they may end up confronting you. Correct in private. As much as possible, deal with student misconduct in private. Don't disturb the rest of the students and get them off task simply to get 1 or 2 students back to work. Also, public reprimands may backfire and get you involved in the game of escalating remarks with a student. Don't make empty threats. Do not say you're going to do something to a student or the class unless you have thought it over carefully and are really ready to do it. For instance, do not threaten to call the parents of every child in the room and tell them what rotten children they have unless you have a good deal of time and alternative plans for the next year. Don't put a hand on a student in anger or even annoyance. Do not even think of striking a student, no matter how much you are tempted. When a situation is emotionally charged, even your well-intended gesture can be misrepresented. If students are fighting, however, you may need to restrain them physically for their own good. Think through behavior problems. When your class or an individual student is not behaving up to your expectations, treat the event as a problem-solving activity. Do not flail around or get panicky or discouraged. Coolly identify exactly what the problem is, consider possible causes, and test some possible solutions. Get help. If management problems persist and you cannot solve them on your own, get help from a colleague or an administrator. Do not let things fester. Do not be shy about asking for help, particularly in relation to discipline problems, which are so common for many beginning teachers. Be sure there is a backup system. If you need to remove a student from your room, you need to know that a system is in place to back you up. Be sure your rules are in accord with school-wide expectations. For example, if the school has decided that chewing gum is tolerable and you crack down on it, you can expect to have more trouble than the issue is probably worth. The questioning process is a central feature of most classrooms. Teachers ask questions not only to monitor student comprehension, but also to stimulate students to engage with the content, relate it to their prior knowledge, and to think about its applications. Students indicate that teachers may ask hundreds of questions in a day's lesson, but they often fail to ask questions that require students to process and analyze information, and many of their questions require only a rote response of memorized facts. Teachers also tend to rush students' responses, not giving them adequate time to provide varied and thoughtful answers. Some teachers do not direct as many questions to certain groups of students, such as minority students, girls or boys, or slower learners, thereby depriving them of the opportunity to be active participants in classroom learning. Mastery of questioning skills attributes to students' learning and therefore is important for effective teaching. Good questioning behavior requires that teachers provide students with sufficient time to think about and respond to questions. What do you think is the average amount of time a teacher waits for a student to respond to a question he or she has asked? Mary Budd Rowe, a science educator, determined in a series of studies that the teachers she observed waited less than 1 second before calling on a student to respond. Furthermore, after calling on a student, they waited only about a second for the student to answer before calling on someone else, rephrasing the question, giving a clue, or answering it themselves. How can students think carefully or deeply when they only have a second to respond to a teacher's questions? Rowe followed up these observations with studies designed to train teachers to increase their wait time. After questions from 1 second to 3 to 5 seconds, she reported amazing results: an increase in the average length of student responses, an increase in unsolicited but appropriate student responses, an increase in student-initiated questions, a decrease in failures to respond, an increase in student-to-student interaction, and an increase in speculative responses. In short, she found that longer wait times led to more active participation on the part of more students and an increase in the quality of their participation. Subsequent research by others replicated Rowe's finding. If questions require students to think about material or generate original responses, they need a longer time to think about their answers than if they were being asked only to recall information from memory. In addition to longer wait times, those who have studied the relationship between questioning strategies and student achievement have identified a number of other techniques as signs of effective teaching. This research suggests that teachers use the following strategies: phrase questions clearly, avoid vague questions, ask questions that are purposeful in achieving the lesson's intent, ask brief questions because long ones are often unclear, Ask questions that are thought-provoking and demand original and evaluative thinking. Encourage students to respond in some way to each question asked. Distribute questions to a range of students and balance responses from volunteering and non-volunteering students. Avoid asking yes, no, and leading questions. To stimulate thinking, probe students' responses, or demand support for their answers. Provide students with feedback about their responses, both to motivate and to let them know how they are doing. With knowledge and practice, teachers can learn questioning strategies that engage all students in the verbal interactions that support student learning. Another skill related to a teacher's effectiveness is skill in planning. The plans teachers make for lessons influence the opportunities students have to learn because plans determine the content students will experience in a lesson and the focus of the teaching processes. Effective teachers base their plans on a rich store of perceptions of classroom events and of their students' progress towards educational objectives and content standards. This store of perceptions also helps teachers make adjustments during instruction when plans must be adapted to the immediate situation. Teachers do 4 basic types of planning: yearly, unit, weekly, and daily, and all are important for effective instruction. Research shows that experienced teachers don't plan the way curriculum experts recommend, that is, by beginning with instructional objectives and then selecting instructional activities to meet those objectives. Instead, many elementary school teachers begin by considering the context in which teaching will occur. Then they think about activities that students will find interesting and that will involve them. Finally, they ponder the purpose these activities will serve. Secondary school teachers, by compromise, focus almost entirely on the content and preparation of an interesting presentation. This discrepancy from the recommended approach doesn't mean experienced teachers don't have goals, especially in these days of content standards. Rather, it suggests that the interest and involvement of their students are paramount. Because research shows that students' achievement is related to academic engaged time, planning should include consideration of how to involve students. In this section, we have looked at 3 skill areas: classroom management, questioning, and planning, that researchers have identified as competencies demonstrated by effective teachers. Principals and other school evaluators assess beginning teachers' competence in these and other skill areas as part of their observations of beginning teachers. Standards for new teachers, such as those created by NTASC, also emphasize these skills. As a consequence, developing classroom management, questioning, and planning skills should be of important concern for those preparing to teach. End of Chapter 6.